Special thanks to Rosetta Stone for sponsoring today's video. What happened to the original Gotei 13? With excitement surging around a possible, maybe imminent Hell Arc announcement, it's time to dive back into one of Bleach's most elusive factions, and a group that many in the community, myself included, suspect will play a large and potentially even villainous role in the arc, the original Gotei 13. The original Gotei 13, the 13 captains who made up the first iteration of the military organisation that we know so well today, are mostly still shrouded in mystery. Sure, we've learned a little more about them over the years, in particular thanks to the Thousand Year Blood War arc anime, but still, major questions linger. And today, I want to look at one question in particular that really sticks out to me, and feels like something of an elephant in the room. What happened to these guys? Based on what we do know, not just about these characters, but about how the Gotei 13 functions in general, it doesn't seem to make sense that 11 of the strongest captains to ever exist would just vanish over the course of 1,000 years, bearing in mind the remaining two members, the surviving two members, Yamamoto and Unohana, persisted to the present day, with Unohana in particular barely looking a day older than she did a millennium ago. So, what happened to the original Gotei 13? Of course, we don't know for sure. Right now, we can't know for sure. But I'd like to present some ideas, some theories. 1,000 years might seem like a long time, but for Shinigami, well, considering how hard it's meant to be to kill a captain, I can't help but feel like they seem to cycle in and out of them quite frequently. Anyway, let's dive in. By the way, if you enjoy the channel and you want to help support weekly Bleach content like this, consider checking out the Patreon down in the description below, where you too can support the channel over there and get your name in the credits of every single video, just like these patron supporters are doing. It is greatly appreciated and it really does help out a lot. Speaking of supporting the channel, before we begin, first a word from today's sponsor. The final season of Bleach is nearly here, and there's no better way to engage with your favourite anime than through the language. Learning Japanese with Rosetta Stone means you can skip the dub, and hey, maybe even the sub too in the future, allowing you to get more out of your favourite series. I've been making the most out of Rosetta Stone's unique approach that's worked for over 30 years. They completely immerse you in the language from the word go, so that the process of learning the language is more than just rote memorization. For me, it's about connecting with the culture and the medium that I love so much, so that I might understand and appreciate it on an even deeper level, and so this kind of in-depth dynamic approach is really fulfilling and worthwhile. The Stories feature is a great example of this, and one of my favourites. The app is full of complete, original stories written entirely in the language that you're trying to learn. It sounds like a lot, right? But the key here is immersion. There's no better way to learn than by doing, and I really enjoyed tackling a piece of genuine Japanese writing as opposed to scrolling through a list of vocabulary. Meanwhile, Rosetta Stone's true accent technology gives you instant feedback on your pronunciation by comparing the smallest details of your speech with native speakers.
女の人と彼女の犬。
女の人と彼女犬. Look, Rosetta Stone has genuinely become part of my language learning routine, and it's helped me stay consistent over time. If you'd like to start learning a language yourself, or improve one that you're already working on, then check out the link in my description to get a special discount on Rosetta Stone subscriptions. So when it came to the manga, we knew virtually nothing about these guys for its entire run. In chapter 511, Yu-Ha Bark revealed that they were a gang of savage killers and thugs who ruled the Soul Society with naught but raw power, and as a result were feared far and wide, for they were the strongest generation of the Gotei 13 to ever live. The Thousand Year Blood War arc anime took it a huge step further, however, going so far as to show us the showdown between the original Gotei 13 and Yu-Ha Bark's Lichtreich, as the Quincy King invaded the Soul Society only to be met with disaster as this captain group annihilated his forces. Alongside this, Kubo released a full, colour page spread, showing the original Gotei 13 lineup, at last truly defining their characters, making them more than just a series of sinister silhouettes, revealing their names and associated divisions in time for their appearance in episode 7. And while they're all new characters in their own right, some of them have interesting affiliations that are pretty obvious from the get-go. For example, the original 2nd Division captain is Chika Shihoin, clearly an ancient ancestor of Yoroichi and Yushiro and head of the noble Shihoin clan from 1,000 years ago. Others include the original captain of the 3rd Division Kinroku Izuhara, captain of the 4th Division Chigori Shijima, captain of the 5th Division Danjiro Obana, captain of the 6th Division Saito Furofushi, captain of the 7th Division Nobutsuna Shigyo, captain of the 8th Division Batsuunsai Katori, captain of the 9th Division Entetsu Kumoi, captain of the 10th Division Furuoki Otogawa, captain of the 12th Division Uhin Zenjoji, and captain of the 13th Division Saizo Sakahone. So, now we knew who they were, at least on a surface level, but that still doesn't explain what became of them over the years. How is it that these 11 Shinigami all completely vanished over the course of the next millennium, despite being so strong that they were able to totally dominate Yhwach and his Quincy Empire, establishing Shinigami dominion over the spiritual world, as far as we know, uncontested for years to come? Not only do they disappear into the annals of history, but they're never mentioned by anyone save for Yhwach. They are clearly, potentially, at least a few generations removed by the time we reach the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, or are they? Because it's totally possible that some of these characters lasted longer than we might think. But now, let's get into the meat of the video, and tackle some of the reasons why these captains may no longer be around. So, what could have happened to these 11 captains who once helped Yamamoto establish his Iron Fist rule, a bloodthirsty pack of killers who were court guards in name only? Let's start with the first possibility, and also the one that I think is probably the least likely overall. Some of these characters might have simply retired from their duties as a Shinigami and left the Gotei 13 of their own volition. Now, why is this the least likely, you ask? Well, because it's complicated to leave the Gotei 13. In chapter 315.3, Kisuke Urahara lays out the terms for a Shinigami attempting to leave the Gotei. The thing is, the Gotei 13 is a military occupation that you enter into essentially for life. It kind of becomes your life. You live and breathe your work as a court guard soldier. Kisuke tells Hiyori, and I quote, "The companies make no provision for resignation. When someone leaves a company for personal reasons, it's termed a leave of absence. If they leave for an extended period and don't return, it's called expulsion. We don't recognize an individual's right to resign." So essentially, resignation is not allowed. You're not allowed to just up and leave the Gotei 13 for no reason, like you might quit a job because you simply don't want to do the job anymore. Now, of course, who knows how long these have been the rules for? And interestingly, Hiyori, despite being a vice captain, doesn't seem to know this at all based on her reaction. It's totally possible that some of the original Gotei 13 walked away close to 1,000 years ago, and maybe these rules were put in place to stop that from happening again. That being said, I can't imagine Yamamoto allowing some of his most powerful assets to just walk, especially during this turbulent period of essentially warlords and criminals ruling the Soul Society. He might have been concerned that they would splinter off to try and create their own rival faction, and so perhaps Yamamoto himself killed some of them, put them to the sword, as it were, if they did in fact try to leave. Interestingly though, it seems to only be difficult to leave the Gotei 13 if you don't have a reason. Because Kisuke also tells Hiyori that leaving for actual reasons is in fact possible. As he says, if someone leaves the company for a personal reason, that's known as a leave of absence. And if they leave for an extended period and simply don't return, well, that's expulsion. So here's what that means. Shinigami are allowed to leave the Gotei 13 if they have presumably a worthwhile personal reason to do so. I would assume that's perhaps their health, or maybe the health of a loved one. For example, I wonder if Ukitake would have been granted a leave of absence if he ever actually requested it, but I would assume that he would want to stay on. It is kind of weird though, considering Kisuke calls it a leave of absence, because that seems to imply to me that maybe they would do so under the presumption that they would one day return to their post. But maybe that's just a formality. The second one is intriguing too, and actually links back to what I was saying earlier more so. While Shinigami can't simply resign, so they can't leave in an official capacity, they can, well, leave and never come back. Turn their back on the Gotei 13, essentially. However, if they do so, they are expelled, likely meaning they will never be welcomed back either. It's almost like a self-imposed exile. And this presumably means they can't enter the Seirete anymore either, whereas a Shinigami who takes a leave of absence probably can. I know it's a little different because they are traitors, they committed high treason. I would assume this is what Aizen, Gin, and Tosen fall under, because they just leave the Gotei. It's obviously not official and they don't come back, so I would assume, on their records, it would probably say expulsion. Although maybe, like I said, it's a little different because they've committed high treason. Anyway, I bring this up because if there's any member of the original Gotei 13 who could have retired, I mean, there's a couple, I guess, right? If you're retiring specifically because of old age, Saizo Sakahone seems the obvious candidate to me. He's the only one of these guys who actually looks old at this point, and we'll get to him again later. But I would also wonder about Chikushi Hoin, the member of the nobility, because there do seem to be different rules for the aristocracy, as you might expect. Ginrei Kuchiki, for example, is seen splitting his time between the squad barracks and his own residence, while most pertinently of all, Omaida's father, Morenoshin, was once Yoruichi's vice-captain as recently as only 100 years prior to the main story, but is now living out his days in opulence in the family home. There's no sign he was even ever a Shinigami at all. So that seems like a possibility to me, for Chika specifically anyway. Although that doesn't explain why he's never been seen since, unless he just lives as a recluse perhaps. I mean, we've also never seen Ginrei again. And so, like I said, retirement itself is obviously totally different from wanting to resign. Retiring due to old age might constitute a personal reason, and like I said, this could be where the likes of Ginrei has gone. Plus, in chapter 315.1, Kyoraku even mentions that the previous 3rd Division captain before Rose actually retired. Maybe that was Kinroku Izuhara, having lived and worked in that position for almost 1,000 years by that point before deciding to bow out. Before we continue, if you haven't done yet, if you're one of the 53 or so % of my viewers who aren't yet subscribed, please consider hitting that button down below if you like weekly Bleach content just like this. Of course, Core 4 is just around the corner, and maybe more as well, so this is a great place to be and a great time to do it. For you, it's quick, it's free, it's easy, but for me, it helps out a lot, and it does mean everything for the channel's growth, its health, and its exposure, so please help us try and reach 300,000 subs. I would greatly appreciate it. Following on from this idea of resigning, of expulsion, I want to return to an idea mentioned in that previous segment, which is exile. It's totally possible that certain characters either chose to exile themselves, or maybe more interestingly, were exiled from the Gotei 13 once the laws and regulations began to be drafted up. After all, we've seen that happen. Kisuke, Tessai, Yoruichi, Isshin, these characters are all exiles. Because, at some point the Central 46 would have been introduced into the picture, it would have been founded, and laws would have begun to be enforced by a judiciary body that operates independently from the Gotei itself. And that's kind of interesting to think about too, because it's funny to think that the Gotei 13 was founded 1,000 years ago, presumably before any kind of Central 46 body, since they seemed to operate with impunity, yet at some point someone came along and created all these laws to rein in these all-powerful murderous Shinigami. Maybe the Central 46 was created by one of these original captains who felt they had too much power. Maybe it was Yamamoto. It's interesting to consider that while I imagine Yamamoto was the kind of overall strongest of these captains, there may have been captains who were a lot tougher, more hard-line than even Yamamoto. Yu Harbach, of course, makes a big point about Yamamoto mellowing out a great deal after achieving peace and defeating the Lichtreich. And we've all kind of assumed the original Gotei 13 just chilled out alongside him, but what if some of them defied him? What if some, like the seemingly chaotic Saito Furofushi or the sinister Entetsu Kumoi, didn't agree with the new path the Gotei 13 was headed down? If some of these characters did in fact rebel, if they didn't align with Yamamoto's new vision for peace, what would have become of them? Just how in step with the Captain Commander were these guys anyway? Like I said a minute ago, it feels like an Aizen and the Espada situation to me, where Yamamoto was able to gather them all in one place and keep them in line over the years through his sheer strength. I remember when the original Gotei 13 were first revealed in full, there were a ton of theories about the individual characters, of course, but one of my favourites was the idea that the original captain of the 7th Division, Nobutsuna Shigyo, was somehow connected to the mysterious Beast Realm from which Komamura and his clan hail. Of course, there was the fact that Nobutsuna helmed the 7th Division, not that that means he has to have any kind of connection to Komamura whatsoever, but compounding that idea was the fact that his design seems to incorporate what looks to be an animal's pelt in what feels like more than a coincidence or a callback. I guess it would be a call forward, since Komamura obviously took up the post a lot later. Anyway, this leads me on to my next point. Could any of these guys be in prison? I'll be honest, even for the original Gotei 13, Nobutsuna Shigyo looks like a bad guy. Before his name was revealed, he was immediately dubbed the evil pirate captain, and I've got to say, he has my favourite design of the lot. But what if he is a member of the Beast Clan? And what if he was imprisoned prior to the events of the main story? Which is maybe a reason for why characters like Komamura and his grandfather felt a need to hide their identities and live in the shadows. On another note, what if one of these guys somehow ended up immortal and was locked away in Muken? But that brings us to the final and, I guess, most likely answer. They're dead. And I say it's the most likely, but I still don't necessarily see why that would be the case. As far as we know, the Gotei 13 has enjoyed an unusually lengthy period of peace since the original war against Yhwach, and both Yamamoto and Unohana lived to the modern day. Unless, of course, they were, as mentioned before, executed for crimes they committed, or maybe even died fighting a hollow. I mean, it happens. They could have been killed in battle against each other for all we know. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Kyoraku actually gives us a little breakdown of what happened to the prior generation of captains in the first chapter of Turn Back the Pendulum. So, just a little before 110 years prior to the main storyline, and he notes that the previous 10th Division captain was in fact killed. Maybe that was Furuoki Otogawa, who had persisted up until an unknown point. The 10th Division spot isn't filled by the time of Turn Back the Pendulum, so maybe it was a recent death. And so that would mean, based on our own speculations, that at the very least, the 3rd Division's original captain Kinroku Izuhara and the 10th Division's original captain Furuoki Otogawa could have been the last two captains to hold those posts prior to Turn Back the Pendulum. We don't know. And I'll be honest, just based on design alone, I can absolutely see Kinroku Izuhara working alongside Chikane Iba as his vice captain. They have a very similar vibe. And of course, perhaps most pertinently of all, we need them to be dead for them to work in the Hell Arc as many of us predict they will. If all 11 of these guys are dead by the time of the Hell Arc, then all 13 members of the original Gotei are in Hell right now. Assuming the Konso Reisai has been practiced since the Gotei 13's inception. And I would assume it would have to be, right? Because based on why it's done, the fact that certain spirit class reishi will linger forevermore unless it is moved on, they would still be around somewhere, or their reishi would be anyway. Again, considering how ancient Yamamoto was, and the fact that Unohana looks virtually identical to how she looks in the modern day. And actually, speaking of that, I wonder if Kubo, if he could go back in time, maybe he didn't know that Unohana was going to be one of the oldest captains from the get-go. Maybe he would make her look a little older nowadays, because it is kind of weird that she looks exactly the same for over 1,000 years, where every other character at least kind of grows up. Obviously, Kenpachi has grown up a lot, Yamamoto has grown up a lot, That is kind of weird. But it's hard to imagine any of these guys, except, again, maybe the already decrepit-looking Saizo Sakahone simply dying of old age. But then I guess the same is true, like I said, for characters like Ginrei Kuchiki, right? He's presumably dead, since we never see him again, but he could just be retired. It's impossible to know for sure, but narratively, the easiest answer is simply to say they are all dead, they all died over the years, presumably in different circumstances, and now they're all in hell. I guess if the Hell Arc does happen, and if the Gotei 13 do play a major role, if they are a major component, maybe we'll find out what happened to the individual members, but to be totally honest, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video, a slightly shorter one this time, but I hope you enjoyed it all the same. A look into what could have happened to the original Gotei 13, because it does seem to be shrouded in mystery, and it is a little weird as well. It does feel like the elephant in the room somewhat. Why are none of these characters around in the present day? Why have we never seen nor heard hide nor hair of them, despite the fact they're supposed to be the strongest generation of captains ever, and the fact that the Gotei 13 has seemingly endured 1,000 years of peace? Unless, of course, there was some other enemy who showed up at some point and killed off a couple of them, perhaps. But if you, Harbart, couldn't manage it, I'd be very curious to find out who that was. Of course, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Are any of these outcomes going to be likely? Are they all dead? Or are some of them in prison? Are some of them in exile? Maybe existing somewhere far away? I'd love to get all of your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know. Alright guys, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already to help support the channel on our journey to 300,000 subs. It's only possible with your help, and I do greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Speaking of which, check out the Patreon as well to help take your support for the channel that extra step further. It does mean everything, and I do greatly appreciate it. It does help a lot as well. That's the most important thing. Without you, I wouldn't be able to keep doing this, so thank you all so very much. Alright guys, until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.